The panel is being moderated by Barry James Folsom. Barry has been a Valley executive for a number of years. He has been CEOs and CMOs of public as well as private companies. And I would leave it in Barry's able hand to conduct a wonderful and stimulating panel. Over to you, Barry.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody. Appreciate you all being here, given a little confusion about the timing. Product market fit is a very, very important topic, and Mark Andreessen in 2007 wrote a blog post that brought the term to people's attention. The unfortunate part about that was he really amplified that market was more important than the team in relating to achieving success or failure. That market was more important than product in achieving success or failure. So I kind of reversed the terms and call it market product fit. And as a panel here, they'll give you some insights into why you kind of look at the market first as you're developing the product. I've been in the high-tech industry for 30 plus years, and I have yet to see where the best product wins in a market. It's like less than 1% of the time, the best product. For instance, Windows, I don't think is a better product than OS X, yet it won the market because Microsoft is not a technology company, it's a marketing company. So what is market product fit? I'll give you my two definitions. First, it satisfies latent needs of the target persona in the target market. It may be unarticulated latent needs that you as a company far exceed your competitors in meeting those unarticulated latent needs. And second, the actual usage, the second part is if you were to deprive after being in the market for 2 years and took it out of the market, the customers would do you bodily harm. They're that connected to your product that they can't live without it. Those are the definitions. Today we have a fabulous panel of people with deep knowledge and expertise and experience in this space. And so let me introduce, on your left is Alan Cohen, Nate Williams, and Wes Wasson. And you can see on the board there the companies they work for and who they are. So without further ado, I'd like to get right to the discussion, and we're going to go a little bit round robin here. So I'm going to start with Alan first. Since your current company, Illumio, if I got it pronounced right, is in stealth mode, let me ask you about your Nexus experience.
Sure.
Okay. What were the early challenges in you obtaining market product fit there?
So first of all, thank you, and it's great to see everybody this afternoon.
Closer.
At Nexus, and I think some people may know about that, Nexus was a network virtualization company that 2 years ago, roughly, was acquired by VMware. Our major opportunity was to reinvent networking in the model of virtualization akin to the way the server model was reinvented through virtualization. And to do that, the appetite had to, to your term of market product fit, was a very large group of folks who consume networking. It's roughly a $50 billion industry, but hadn't changed much in the last 20 years. I'd say the principal insight that we kind of stumbled onto very early is that we actually had to shift our buying center from the networking folks to the virtualization folks, which tend to be the server infrastructure team. And we had to educate them, and we had to shift control. And Wes knows this because they did something similar at Citrix, and we were actually partnered with them on something called OVS, which was in their virtualization suite in Zen. So it was really about shifting the buying center to another powerful buying center. And if that other buying center wasn't very strong, probably the whole mission would have fell apart. Server market is pretty much as big as the networking market, give or take a couple of $1 billion, and so it represents a very important budget center, and actually it was a budget center that was very attuned to the new model of virtualization that the other industries, the networking group, wasn't. Only now, years later, is the industry now bringing virtualization through into the networking cycle.
Any comments from?
Well, I think it makes total sense. I think this notion of being very aware of where the where the buyer is, where the market is absolutely key. And one of the things that's been impressed on me over the years is really kind of speaks to your first point, Barry, about thinking about the market first. And I think so often people miss what they're doing because they're asking the wrong questions to the wrong people. And I think by from the very beginning being very thoughtful about that, not just asking who you think the buyer is and where the current budget is, but asking those around them, it makes a big difference.
I would echo your thoughts almost exactly. We had a discussion before we walked in just about product market fit in general, and one of the trends that I've seen of the startups that I advise is they haven't spent enough time thinking about or talking to those potential customers. We've got such great engineering talent that can build almost anything that we work on. We don't spend enough time thinking about that end customer. And so is it product or market? They're both important. You really want to make sure you're in a market that's got a large available market, high TAM, but you also want to make sure that you know who your buyers are. And that's very, very specific. When you think about bringing a company to market or a product, my last company was in home automation, you have to think about who is the purchaser, what's their decision-making process, and what's at stake. And so if you deconstruct that buying behavior and you say what's in it for them, how they can win, you're going to get a lot farther than just saying, hey, I've done something cool.
And just, Barry, for the record, since Andreessen Horowitz has been an investor in my current company, in my prior company, Mark had it absolutely right. He knew it the whole time. Just want to make that absolutely clear, particularly for any members of the media who people might be tweeting that out.
Nate.
Sure.
Alan gave us a B2B example. Let's ask you about a B2C example. How did you achieve market product fit at 4Home Media?
Yeah. So my background prior to 4Home was at Intel. I worked on a project called Larrabee in discrete graphics processing. Before that, I was at Walt Disney. 4Home really aimed to kind of create a market that Nest has now definitely become a leader in, with home automation. And we were actually a B2B to C company, whereas we sold into the network folks, the Ciscos and the Verizons and Motorola's that would ultimately take it to the end user. And so I learned two good things there. First is we did achieve product market fit because we were able to stage our product, our software, effectively through folks like Netgear and Motorola, et cetera. And we were acquired by Motorola in 2010. Where we did not succeed, and this is a lesson I take in my current job, is the activation of that product. I call that in my team the last mile problem. So if you have a software license that has a service provider or a retailer selling your product, you don't make money or succeed until they sell it. So if we partner together, Wes and I would have to not only make sure we have a great deal, but I'd have to make sure I'm supporting Wes and his team at the Citrix side to sell through. And so that was a real lesson learned in terms of doing B2B to C. And I think in those situations, it's very clear to understand it's not only having a great product, it's making sure that there's an activation plan that's going to make the consumer see the benefit.
Any comments?
The only thing that I think, having worked at one of those companies that was your partner, I think the thing you have to focus on is that if you're dependent on a downstream channel to drive your revenue, the incentives for that channel have to be aligned with yours. And if they do not see that as part of their core mission, it frequently doesn't go anywhere. So I think if you look at downstream channels, particularly strategic OEM partners, they really have to be jazzed about what you're doing. And if the mainstream salespeople and channel managers of that partner don't really see the pony in it for them, I think you're going to have a challenge. So just because a partner is big doesn't mean they're actually, it doesn't really align with what they do.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. I mean, the product market fit is now synonymous with traction, raising money in 05, 06. It was really to show us the traction. And then, one of the things I now advise folks that I've either invested in or advising is there is nothing like getting actual deployments. Getting a commitment to deploy is not the same as getting deployments. So as you start thinking about that, it's building in what is the plan for how you're going to activate my software? What is the plan that you're going to market it? And making sure you just ask the right questions.
Yeah, and maybe one little thing I'll throw in there as well, because I completely agree with the comment. At the same time, I think there's a non-intuitive pitfall that you can get into in being so thoughtful of, do I have a big TAM in front of me that's got velocity, that you try to shoot for that in the beginning, right? So I think you get that set in the mind, you put it on the whiteboard, you get all that, then go narrow, and then go narrower than that, and then be even narrower than that, until you can define something very, very discrete and go and kill it in that market, because there, traction with 6 customers in one vertical in one location will beat 5, 6 in multiple markets every day of the week.
Yeah, and that's counterintuitive, so it's a very good point you just made, that the more narrow you make the market, actually the larger it is.
It applies to your messaging as well.
Yes, good. Okay, Wes, at Citrix, how did you achieve market product fit as you shifted to cloud computing?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, because obviously your question there relates to a big mainstream enterprise pivoting as the market around it changes, but I think it actually applies at the entrepreneurial level as well to pivots. And I think one of the lessons that really profoundly affected me as we went through those kinds of processes is to really be disciplined about looking outside of your current chessboard for inspiration, right? I mean, so we're so accustomed to, we define the strategic playing field and our competitors and our potential partners and what the landscape looks like. And if we had done that purely at Citrix, that would have said, let's look at what's VMware doing, right? What's Cisco doing? What are the 5, 6 key startups that are doing in this area? What's Microsoft going to do next? And we would have completely missed the big shifts. Instead, we were asking questions like, what is Zynga doing in selling virtual pigs in-app, and can I learn from that, right? How are these things that are entirely outside of our market reinventing the way we think about it? And can I learn something from that about how customers want to consume value that I can then bring in a way that's very disruptive? And I think that's a really, really healthy thing to do, and especially for those of us in Silicon Valley and tech, we get to be so insular. If I'm a B2B enterprise player, if I'm going after the telco market, I look and I think about that space. Look at things entirely different. Spend time out with your spouse at wherever they like to shop, and draw inspiration from that, and ask, could that impact the way we go to market? And I think some of the biggest innovations will come from that kind of thinking.
Good. Any other?
I think Wes is exactly on it here, and I've spent a lot of time with large enterprise customers, and many of them say, I'm not in any rush, I'm not shifting to the cloud, and they're looking at their iPhone or their Android phone, and they're hitting Google or Lyft, or they're buying something on Amazon, and in their personal life, they've already made that shift in a fundamental way. And I think one of the largest challenges is you have to kind of look at the dynamics of your buying center and saying, who are they? So if people are millennials, they're already in the sharing economy. Yeah. So the concept of using cloud computing, whether it's SaaS or infrastructure as a service, is already kind of baked in on how they live their life. If people are not using it, well, then you have kind of a different set of circumstances. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think there's an element there too that gets back to your comment about market first too. That it's when you're drawing inspiration, also spend 10x the amount of time drawing inspiration from what people do, not how they interact with your product. And one of the things I always think about is this sort of notion that a dog is going to chew on whatever bone you give them, right? So if your whole focus is, here's my product, right, and I want you to interact with it, tell me what you like about it, how does it solve your problem, that's what the prospect will do. They'll spend all their time focused on that. Instead, put this away and say, tell me about your life, how you interact with X, what you do here. Then go to the person in the next group over, the person 2 groups over from that, and ask them what their observations are. You're going to learn far more about that. I mean, we give Steve Jobs accolades for his insights on something like the iPhone and a flat screen, glass touch environment. He didn't get that insight from watching people with their BlackBerries and asking them questions about it. He got it from stepping back and watching how we interact with other things and saying, there's a human element here. Now, can I do that to disrupt a market that has tons of potential, lots of existing buying power? And I think it's that, that's that perspective when you step back and look at what people actually do, what people next to them do, what markets that aren't related to yours do, where the real breakthroughs come.
By the way, I think you brought up a good point, Wes, and one of the things as a marketer is to always think about sharpening the saw. And a lot of times, if you're in an enterprise business, we're mostly enterprise marketers here on this panel, it's very myopic because we're always selling similar products to sort of similar customer bases. And the thing I think is important now, when we've seen the speed of social media and seen the speed of even buying behavior, right? Trade shows aren't the same as they were 5 years ago. They're influenced. We found it when I was at Motorola running marketing, that consumers were very self-serve. They wanted to talk to us, but after they went to the website, they got information, they saw a case study. So what I would say to folks that are out there in the audience thinking about how to run it, and it wouldn't matter if you're a salesperson, if you're a developer, it's about getting out there and actually spending some time, making sure you're as sharp as you can be. And so that's where I think TiEcon has been really helpful in terms of providing the resources, providing the networking for folks to really stay sharp.
Good. Thank you. Alan, at your current company is in stealth mode. I'm not trying to get any information from what you're doing.
But ask away. Go ahead.
Yeah. But what are the leading indicators of the process you're using to get market product fit? What's your process?
So it's a good question. At every stage of actually development of our company over the last 2 years, we've pretty much made every decision with customers. From when we were whiteboarding and we didn't have a single line of code written, right through alpha and late alpha and beta, and you think I'm going to tell you when we're going to launch now. But it's all through every one of those steps, and there's been a key set of customers. They've been across a set of verticals. So the other thing is you got to be careful about shopping for an answer. So you could pick a certain customer segment and build your product for that customer segment, then you find out that nobody else wants it. So if you're going to build a platform that's broadly applicable across a market segment, like the enterprise or a service provider or a consumer, you actually have to have a very large cross swath of that. And I'd say, you know, paranoia is a really important attribute, and you just cannot believe your own headlines when you're building something. So actually being tough on yourself is a key element of getting that part right. Not even when you're comfortable, you should be blowing yourself up. You may come to the same answer, and you might have a little bit of churn, but it's very important.
It's more fun too.
And it's more fun, absolutely. And it sells a lot more alcohol.
Any comments?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, good. Nate, we both were at Motorola at different times. It was when I was there, it was a Fortune 50 company, and then Google acquired it, et cetera. But you worked at 4Home Media before you went there. What is, we've been talking more from an enterprise perspective.
Sure.
And Alan just talked about a startup. What are the real distinctions between the two from a playbook or framework of going about it? Is it the same at doing it at a startup, or is it different in a Fortune 100,000 company?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question, and we definitely worked for the same people at Motorola, so that's interesting as well. A very wild ride. I saw it through the Google acquisition and the subsequent divestiture. In our pre-call, we had a good discussion on this. You know, it's interesting. People ask me a lot of comparing, contrasting working at a larger company versus startup. I had obviously done work at Intel and Disney and Motorola Google, and then done some startups that have been successful. I think the key difference is not in the process, because I think the process of making a great product and selling a great product is mostly the same. There's different analogs. I think it's more of the mentality and sort of the conditions. So one thing I would say in my experience at Motorola was we had access in the service provider world to any C-level executive and any company in the world. So American Mobile, China Netcom, Dish, Verizon. And so that would give us very easy access to figure out the product. In a startup world, you may not have that access, but you have some surrogates. The downside in larger companies sometimes is just the process, right? You have to make sure that you're staying sharp. I think the companies who do innovation really well, and I would say Google would be an example, is where they have an opportunity for folks outside of their daily job to do these things in a very, very straightforward way. So for example, when I was at Intel, I was part of a team of something called Larrabee, which was their discrete graphics processing. It grew quite large, 1,200 people. I was like basically the 10th person on the assignment. It went all the way up to Paul Otellini. And so those are great examples. the thing that I would caution is there's a lot of how you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I'm a big company person or I'm a startup guy. I've actually rejected that. I think it's all about innovation. And I think if you're a really strong executive and you're talented, you want to be in the large companies to give you that experience of taking a product and scaling it out to millions and millions of homes or millions and millions of units. In a startup context, what I've found is it really gives you more of that Bo Jackson training. You know, I run marketing and business development and corporate development at GreenWave. We're 190 employees, and so no 2 days are the same. And so just to sum up your question, I think both are great paths towards innovation. I think what we'll see in the future is a better partnership between entrepreneurs who have track records, Alan's a perfect example, and the larger companies where they say, hey, is there a way you can help us think about this problem?
Yeah.
Any other comments on that?
That's great.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Wes, you're a board member at Marketo. How are you as a board member looking at the company as it's trying to achieve you've been there for several years, as it wandered potentially, I don't know the answer, to find their market product fit from a board perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting perspective to sort of see from the other side of the lens. So I was the first outside director to join Marketo back in about 4 years ago, and I can tell you at the time it was entirely non-intuitive that there was even a vibrant market space there. And for those of you who haven't tracked the company, we just took them public in May of last year, over $1 billion valuation. So it's a pretty nice track record, and I think it's going to be an enormously successful space and company. But I think that one of the things that the lesson that you draw out of that, why did I do that at that time? Because there had been a long list of roadkill of companies who had tried to automate marketing, which I think is a fundamentally non-interesting prospect. The thing that was interesting to me was I was looking at it through the lens of where's the money going to go? And I think it's very, I spent most of my career in infrastructure, and I just listen to the way we all think in those spaces, and you tend to follow the technology. Where are the technology trends going? What's the next one? And I would argue that the majority of the big disruptive things that actually make us successful in the ways we measure it happen when people successfully follow the money. Why was Nicira successful ultimately was because they recognized where that money was going in this fundamental shift of things commoditizing and going into a server stack that had traditionally been somewhere else. That was the breakthrough more so than the underlying technology. With Marketo, it was very similar. It was, you look at that space and you realize, the marketing profession, a lot of the people in there are not necessarily quantitative, they're not data-driven. There's a lot of folks who are fundamentally weaker sitting around that CEO table than some of their peers. And yet, they were going to be in this position where all of our lives were playing out digitally. So as a result, they're going to be sitting there in the catbird seat, owning a website, owning the digital footprints of everything. They will be able to know 10x more than the sales guy about what the customers are not only going to do this quarter, but what they're going to do, across the board. So there's going to be a huge money shift there that was going to create a space. And so I think that's a key thing that I'd advise all you to do as you're thinking about that is make sure you're disciplining yourself to spend time saying where are those shifts happening that are going to shift how people buy something, how they consume it. You even brought up the idea of Windows and not being great product initially. I think some of those things will change because how did Windows get in that position? Largely because it could be forced top down from IT, right? Those days are over. Right? Now we're in a world where the individual consumer is accustomed to buying granular value like that, bringing it into enterprise and saying, screw you, I don't care what you bring. Now suddenly the tables get turned. And so I think when you look at that and just think, where's the buying shift, where's the money shift, it'll open yourself up to innovations that you'll entirely miss if you look at it almost exclusively through a technology shift.
Any comments?
I would agree a lot with what Wes is saying because I've had this experience myself. My second startup was a company called Airspace, and we built wireless LAN for the enterprise. I was ultimately acquired by Cisco, but we didn't, and it was really fun because I was the VP of marketing in that company. Everybody thought I was really good, but the truth is Intel put $1 billion into marketing Centrino, and all we had to do was ride behind that shift. And obviously we had to deliver a product behind that shift that did what needed to bring it into the enterprise. But we basically rode that wave. And if you're building a company to the point that Wes just raised, you have to say, am I satisfying demand or am I creating demand? Satisfying demand has to be the easier thing to do. So if marketing is moving to a pervasive social environment, building the capabilities, and Marketo is an absolute market leader in doing this, to let people master that and then become more influential in their company and add more value, it's absolutely brilliant. If you have to convince the entire world that marketing is important and you should make investments in the technology to support marketing, that's kind of a fool's errand. So if you can find that shift and ride it, you have a great chance of building a very large company in a very reasonable period of time.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Let me ask you this question to follow up a little bit on what you're talking about, Alan. We talked about this beforehand. The market could either be a new market, or it could be, as you just described, one that's formulating and big companies are getting behind it, like Internet of Things and what you just mentioned, and then there's going after an existing market. How do you sort that out and figure out for the company, as you're doing the market product fit, which one of those is the one you want to lead with?
Wow, that's a really good question. I bet
Well, I was listening to you,
somebody
so I
else would
played it
answer
back.
that. I mean, look, you come to a market with a set of expertise, a technology in mind, right? And you look at the market and you try to sort through that. Most products are iterations of existing products. I've spent a long time in the networking industry, and somebody made a faster router or a bigger switch or a more comprehensive firewall, and they went into very large market segments, and they did an iteration. And you can build a very nice company, but very rarely do you get a breakout. So you have to decide whether you're in it for the next product, or are you trying to transform an industry, and then you build your strategy. So I think, you have to kind of figure out your DNA early on about what you're about, and then that kind of leads you through that trifurcation that you're talking about. I've done both of them. Bigger risk when you go for the transformation, but obviously could be more fun and bigger opportunity. The iteration on the product theme in an existing market is very easy to get your mind wrapped around, but you have to execute very quickly, and you don't have a long time before the incumbent recovers.
Right. The only comment I give on that too, because I agree, and I've had an opportunity to be in both those as well. But don't downplay the role of luck in this.
Luck is good,
so many of us, if you're entrepreneurial, everybody dreams of having the big disruptive thing that's going to change the world. And I think what that leads to, 9 times out of 10, is this very egocentric approach that usually kills what you're trying to accomplish, because you discount the tremendous value of getting something small started with real traction, with real customers and real revenue. I'd say, you look at across the world, most of these overnight success stories, the more typical thing that they did was they were really wildly successful in one thing that had a flywheel effect going, and then they were in a position to be smart and leverage that into something big. The folks who sit up there and begin with the idea that they're going to change the world, I think it's much more rare that happens.
It's interesting you said that, given the last panel on funding. I mean, I think there's a healthy amount of pattern recognition here in the Valley, and that actually helps because it's so difficult to get through deal flow. But there's no such thing as anointed success. You can take a dream team of folks at a real big opportunity, and there's no guarantees. And so I think part of that is really a healthy skepticism of how hard this is. A characteristic I look when I'm hiring on my team, or even when I want to pair up with somebody on an idea, is this idea of grit. Because markets have a tendency to move at the pace they want to move. You can do some things to sort of change them, put a little TNT, start something. But generally happens, there's a flow that will take advantage, and you need to have the grit when it doesn't happen in 6 months or it doesn't happen in a year. I think it's very important to understand that the market specifically that I'm in, Internet of Things, about a year ago, there was really not that much discussion of it. And then in the last year, between General Electric and Intel and Cisco and others, it's become a very large market. Where we thought about was more than just, we don't want to just be a company that is a shot in the pan about something right now. We thought about, what are the enterprise effects of everything having connectivity both in the home and the enterprise, and solve an issue that was network-based. And one of the things that I've realized in terms of when I talk to startups or look at them is, generally speaking, the folks have an orientation that can solve those problems. So in our case at GreenWave, most people, Verizon or our customers, DirecTV, they assume we can do what we say we're going to do. We have the networking pedigree to do it. And so then it's a question of, okay, we assume you can make this product work. how do we make our business case around that work? And so spending time on business case and business model, working with their internal operations team.
Yeah, and maybe I know we're almost out of time, Barry. But maybe just one kind of final comment there to wrap up. I think I would also encourage folks to think about doing low-tech rapid prototyping. What I mean by low-tech is, we as engineers, we so often want to go in and build the prototypes and get something working and show people and all that, or we want to do PowerPoints of it. But doing something very, very simplistic and having someone interact with what the interface would look like on paper, I mean, whatever, and just, doing that again and again and again to get to see how people do it, and then doing it outside of the target market it really is insightful. One of the things I've had the opportunity to do recently after retiring from Citrix is work with Elevate Africa, which is a nonprofit focused on helping poverty in West Africa through microenterprise, so microloans and training and education and things of that nature. And one of the things that's amazing when you start looking at places like that, you really appreciate the value of innovation outside that market. I mean, you come here in the Valley and we're all ginned up about stuff you could do, like putting a Square device on your iPhone and scanning a card, and it's wonderful. Then you go to Africa where they don't have any of these sorts of things in place, and what are they doing? They invented mobile money. Like, why do you need the credit card? Why do you need the Square scanner? You got the phone. Why is the phone not the credit card and the scanner and the everything? You kind of go, oh, geez, I mean, so I think there's these values of sort of stepping outside that zone and really playing it back where you get these breakthroughs and think, well, gee, if it could work there, I could do this worldwide, right?
All right, I want to thank the three panel members, Alan, Nate, and Wes, for joining us. Can you give them a round of applause, please? I think they did a fantastic job. Thank you.